Hello, you're watching Cherry Red TV. My name's Mark Powell, and I'm label manager for Esoteric Recordings. And I'm pleased to say that with me today is guitarist Peter Banks. Hello, Peter. It's nice for you to come in.
It is.
You've had a long and varied career with lots of bands as a respected guitarist, from bands going back to The Sin, to Yes, to Flash, to various other sessions that you've done. So, if it's possible, I'd like to take you back all the way back to the early days.
Very early days.
The very early days of The Sin, basically, and how that band actually came together. Because obviously that eventually evolved into Mabel Greer's Toy Shop and then Yes. But...
Yeah. We're talking a long time ago, I guess 65 or 66. It's all a little hazy now. It was the first serious band that I was in. I'd been in several bands before that, but it was the first band that actually had a van and were doing quite regular gigs. And I joined completely by accident. I was in Denmark Street in London, which was kind of the Tin Pan Alley of the music business, and there's a little coffee bar there. And I met, I can't remember how I did it, I met Chris Squire in the street. And I was introduced to him by the drummer of Sin. And I met Chris, and then it turned out that they were looking for a new guitar player. They were sneakily trying to get rid of their previous guitar player. This sounds like a Yes deal, but very coldly. And they said, did I want to join? I don't remember auditioning. And then there was a whole series of gigs that I went to see what they were playing and check out what the guitar player was playing, and knowing the fact that I would replace him. And that was my first introduction to the horrors and manipulation that go on, not in the business, but with musicians as well. But anyway, I joined and inherited a Rickenbacker guitar from the old guitar player, and Chris had his Rickenbacker, and we started off doing a lot of Motown stuff, and songs by the Impressions, and heavily influenced by the Action, who were playing at the Marquee, and we just thought they were wonderful. And so that's how we started off, but always with a three-piece harmony, with myself and Chris and the keyboard player. And then gradually we started writing our own material, particularly the keyboard player, who was he was the proper musician in the band, because he could actually read music, and he used to talk to me about Stravinsky and Stockhausen, and probably one of the reasons that I later got into classical music. But we started writing our own material, and then when drug taking began, and it came into 67, we wrote a rock opera, which a lot of people were rumoured to be doing, but we actually performed it on stage, and it was called, embarrassingly, Flower Man. And we had costumes, and we premiered this thing at the Marquee, and it was... I found it particularly embarrassing. I wasn't really into getting dressed up, and we each had our identities were a flower, and I was Peter Buttercup, and had to sing this song. And I was absolutely mortified by the whole thing. And then later on, about a few months later, we did a gangster rock opera. Or oratorio, I suppose would be more correct. and we dressed up in these gangster outfits, and it was kind of an Al Capone thing. But we'd copied the idea from the Move, who were also playing at the Marquee, because the Move had all these gangster suits on. And the whole Sin thing was a good time for me, because I learned a lot, not only about playing, but in being on stage and learning to try and relax a little more, because I was always very, very shy on stage and usually nervous 90% of the time. But Sin was a good it was a good training camp, I suppose.
Because with that band, didn't you take part in some of the sort of the great psychedelic gigs of the time? Were you?
Yeah, I think we played the Roundhouse and UFO Club, and we supported Jimi Hendrix at the Marquee. Well, we had a Marquee residency, so we were the support band for everybody. You know, we supported The Who, we supported The Move, we supported The Nice. And I think we had about 3 residencies at the Marquee, and then gradually graduated to having our own night. And that went on for quite a few months. So we had other bands supporting us, and it became a bit of a chore, you know, because we do one gig a week at the Marquee, and it was like, oh, we're going to play here again. And the same people were there. It's not trying to be disparaging about them. There used to be a girl that ran the Sin fan club, and she would sit in the front row and do her knitting. You know, and that wasn't exactly rock and roll. It wasn't too inspiring. But when we first played at the Marquee, I was absolutely thrilled, because I'd been going there on Tuesday nights to watch The Who, and was very much a fan. And my one ambition was to play at the Marquee. I'd never dreamed that I would. And then, you know, a year and a half later, I'm like thinking, I don't want to play here anymore. You know, it's getting boring. But it was a good introduction. And then after that, I played in about 4 other bands at that place. So spent a long time there.
How did the Sin then finish and Mabel Greer's Toy Shop come about?
I don't remember how Sin disbanded. The singer wanted to get into the clothing business. He was very much kind of entrepreneurial type of person. I think we just ended. I don't remember us breaking up. I think we suddenly stopped playing. And then Chris had helped put this band together called Mabel Greer's Toy Shop, which was, and he asked me to join. And so there were 2 guitar players, bass and drums. Very peculiar band. I hated it at the time. I didn't like playing with another guitar player. The guitar player was the lead singer. He wasn't the most competent guitar player around, but actually we weren't bad. I've listened back to some of that stuff, and we weren't bad. And we did John Peel on the radio, and that, you know, we were heavily psychedelic. And now, as I say, it doesn't sound as bad as I remembered it, but it was very disorganised. And I was always in favour of pretty tight arrangements, you know, with enough room to solo or go off sometimes on a tangent. But I liked to know what was going to happen next. And Mabel Greer's Toy Shop were pretty shambolic in that direction. But once again, it was good playing with Chris, and he and I, though we have differences, have always played together pretty good, and really never had to discuss much musically at all. It just slotted together.
So when did the formative seeds of Yes? When were they sown?
68, summer of 68. I was in yet another band called The Neat Change, another band that had a residency at the Marquee. And I got fired from the Neat Change on my 21st birthday, or the day before, because oddly enough, they wanted to go for a skinhead look, similar to Slade, or Ambrose Slade as they were called then, and I refused to get my hair cut, and musically that was pretty chaotic, so I got kicked out. I was very upset about that. Then I shaved all my hair off out of spite. And then I knew that Chris was in another band, and we had a phone conversation. I said, "How's your band doing? And what are they called?" And he says, "We're called Yes." And I said, "Well, I had that name. I thought of that name a couple of years before." So I kind of said, "Well, I better join then." And it was pretty simple. I went down to see them rehearse in a little cellar underneath a cafe called the Lucky Horseshoe in Shaftesbury Avenue, and I thought they were terrific, and so I joined, and I think then we auditioned Bill Bruford. We got him out of a Melody Maker ad, and he joined because he said he had a Premier drum kit, but we were very into that was the kit to have at the time. Yeah, got to have a Premier kit. That's the brand. And then we found out that it was a bit of an Olympic drum, and it'd been cobbled together. But Bill was fantastic, and I thought, because I was always leaning more towards jazz, and Bill was a die-hard bebopper at the time, and we had a lot of. Bill taught me quite a lot about jazz I didn't know, and we used to sit around and listen to John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins and all that kind of thing. So that was good. And then Yes, I think we only rehearsed for a week or 2 weeks, and then we did a gig, the East Mersey camping site in East Anglia near Colchester, which was a disaster. And I think the second gig was at the Marquee. And then we got a residency at the Marquee, first as a support band and then as the main band. So we were back doing that again.
Because when you read about the history of the Marquee Club, a lot of people, and I know Phil Collins being one of them always says as well, that those early Yes gigs, a lot of people said that were absolutely magical at the Marquee Club, the sort of imagination.
I wish I'd seen them,
And they're the sort of things that people always refer to when they're talking about when the Marquee is being spoken of. At that point as well, your live show in Yes, you were doing very interesting cover versions of songs.
We were basically a covers band to start off. The writing didn't come till a little later. I mean, John had a lot of ideas for songs, but because of the short rehearsal time, we just we were doing covers. We did Beatles. We did a Traffic song, "Heaven Is in Your Mind." We did a thing by The Fifth Dimension, Carpet Man. We did Eleanor Rigby, and they were great. And the whole premise was, if we were going to do a cover, let's make it sound very different to what you expect. Kind of like Vanilla Fudge were doing at that time. And that was our kind of unspoken manifesto, that we didn't want to sound like any other band. Certainly, I was desperately trying to avoid playing blues guitar licks, which most guitar players were doing at that time. And I was very consciously going out of the way to avoid cliches that came from other guitar players, and slowly out of all this slightly chaotic. No, I won't say chaotic. We all had very different tastes in music, which was very healthy. So we would take a piece of music and then stick a bit of cowboy music in it. So you want something from the Magnificent Seven, we can do that. And it was we just cobbled together bits of everything. Let's put a bit of Gustav Holst in here. Let's have a little bit of Stravinsky in here. And for some bizarre reason, it worked. And we became pretty good. Sometimes. I mean, we also often played badly. And it's... I think mostly Bill and I liked the... I'm trying to think. Although we were a very pre-arranged band, Bill and I used to like to go off on a tangent and extend things. And I often used to think, well, I'm not going to play the same as I played last night. I'm going to play everything completely different. Which for the lead singer, for John, was fantastically annoying because he'd have all this stuff going on behind him, and I'd be throwing in little things, and Bill would be not playing on the beat. It was great. It was very inventive, but very difficult for singing to. But strange band. I mean, we weren't really a rock band. I don't know what we were, but it was certainly. We certainly didn't sound like anybody else. Sometimes we went too far to not to be part of the musical gang. And sometimes it got a little crazy, but pretty good times, I think. Though personally, we had a lot of problems. You know, every gig there would be a kind of post-mortem. About, well, that was horrible. You were too loud. You were playing an F sharp when you're supposed to be playing a D natural. All that every night, and John particularly would be haranguing us and saying, this is terrible. We've got to do this. Got to do that. But kind of healthy to you have to be a pretty strong person to be in the band, and if you didn't get your say, then you were out. I mean, which had happened to me on the first time because I was a bit, maybe a little quieter, not quite as vociferous as I should have been. So that band was he who shouted the loudest got his say. But a terrific band, really.
So you had some pretty major exposure when you early on when you supported Cream.
Yeah.
At the Albert Hall for that.
I think we played there 3 or 4 times. We were almost like the resident band there. Well, we had good connections. Our manager, Roy Flynn, who managed the Speakeasy, a terrific guy, Roy, and he ended up giving his job up at the Speakeasy to manage Yes full time. But of course, he had fantastic connections. So, we would get to play virtually in London, wherever we could. And the Albert Hall was good. And I think I spent most of my time down at the Speakeasy. And there'd be a fantastic rush after a gig if we were playing in Birmingham. The bar wouldn't close till 3 a.m. And there'd be a fantastic rush to see if we could make the Speakeasy before 1 o'clock when the restaurant closed. And, of course, we'd eat there for nothing. So, we weren't exactly on a budget in those days. A budget was unheard of. So I used to get free food from the Speakeasy and free relaxation and free alcohol. And it was good. And I got to play with Jimi Hendrix and Ginger Baker and, the little jam things. Great days, And King Crimson did their first gig at the Speakeasy, and they were just fantastic. And we realised that we had serious competition, and we went into intensive rehearsals for a few weeks because we realised that Crimson were far better than we were and much more inventive. Just blew us away.
But if you go back to those, even the first Yes album, I mean, how quickly was that album recorded?
Very. 5 or 6 days.
So was
maybe.
That essentially your live set as it was at the time, most of those things? Or?
Yeah, we did a couple of songs that we never played on stage. We did a thing called Sweetness, which was the first single, which was about the most unrepresentative of the band that you could think of. We played that a few times on stage, and I was always a bit embarrassed by that. It was the quiet number. It was very good for John. It was a singer's... Sounds like a contradiction, a singer's song, but it was a singer's piece of music. but yeah, the first album was we really didn't know what we were doing. The producer didn't know what he was doing. Bill, I don't think Bill had been in the studio before, and he didn't even realise. He always tells us that you could get separate mixes in the headphones, and he spent most of those days hearing me very, very loud in his left ear and not hearing any drums. And I mean, that's how naive it all was. And suddenly realised 3 days later, oh, you can have a different balance in the headphones. But and we spent about 3 days trying to get a Hammond organ sound. Because Tony, we didn't have a Hammond then. Tony was playing a Vox Continental keyboard. So we hired this Hammond organ. We couldn't get a sound out of it. And I think Armin Ertegun, the president of Atlantic, came down on about the third day to see how we were doing. And we really had... we were still fiddling around with a Hammond organ, trying to... And it sounded like a fairground organ. You know, it was like a merry-go-round. It was just horrible. And when that album was done, none of us were happy about it. Although now I can, like every little thing, the Beatles thing, sounds fantastic. And a couple of others are okay, but really the sound was very disappointing. We just... the recordings that we did for the BBC at that time sounded better than... Not sonically better, but certainly played better than the way we played on that first album. But once again, it was a learning thing.
So when you did Time in a Word, were you allotted a bit more studio time there?
Yeah. And we had Eddie offered as an engineer who was terrific. And we had a better studio. And a little more time, though I don't think more than a couple of weeks. But we were learning more on how to piece music together instead of all playing, all at the same time. We'd put bass and drums on first, and that kind of thing. It was more controlled, and we finally got the instruments to sound like real instruments. Putting the orchestra on was something that I was never in favour of. And that was disappointing because the orchestra were just doubling the parts that either I or Tony Kaye would play. And that was basically John's idea. And it was kind of fashionable. Deep Purple had played with an orchestra, the Nice had done it, the Moody Blues had done it. So it's like, oh, we better do it as well. But I can listen to that album now and quite enjoy it. Although the making of the album was pretty horrible. Because we were all going in different directions. And the producer of that album, who name I will never mention because I just didn't get on with him, we had a big row in the studio when he was asking me could I play more like Jimmy Page. And not one of my favourite guitar players at the time, and this guy had never produced a band before, and he was kind of smoking buddies with John, and they would have a couple of joints, and which Bill was always very disgusted about. But basically the producer didn't like my playing. I don't think he liked me particularly. It was kind of mutual. And I ended up, one feverish day, I threw a Rickenbacker guitar at him. And I think he stormed out. I don't think I stormed out. But that's how tough it got. Very difficult time. Very difficult.
It's funny because when you listen to the album, it seems there's a lot of inventiveness going on there that probably belies the tension that was there. So,
yeah, it was kind of done under pressure, but we were pretty good at motivating ourselves, and I think some of the creativity came out of a lot of friction. We just didn't get on particularly well. We all lived in the same flat as well, apart from Chris. And that was sometimes, a little room bedsits in Fulham, in Munster Road, 50A Munster Road. And that was kind of tense because you'd come back from a gig, and if it hadn't been a particularly good gig, I mean, it'd be, you know, John, you haven't done the dishes, you know, and this kind of thing. And whose turn is it to clean out the bath? You know, this, and that was kind of living a bit like students, you know, with little things, you know, marked in the fridge, you know, don't touch my food, you know, that kind of thing. Pretty odd. A bit like, it was a bit like a firehouse, because we'd get a sudden call, and can you do a gig tonight in Manchester? And then it'd be all systems go, and so there was that constant kind of tense atmosphere, sometimes near panic, because we were on call all the time, you know, and wherever somebody asked us to play, we'd be there. So sometimes it'd be, yeah, literally in the fire engine and off to the gig.
So shortly after that, after Time and a Word was recorded, you left the band.
I was kicked out.
Yeah.
At Luton Technical College was the final gig, and I didn't know. Had no idea. And after the gig, I was just John and Chris said it might be good if you left. And apparently Bill and Tony didn't even know about this till after the gig. And I never really found out the real reason, oddly enough. And even now, I still don't know. There was, John once said I was more into my clothes than the music. And I still don't know. I mean, I don't care now. I mean, it's, but I've been asked that question so many times, and you know, it makes no difference really. But yeah, I departed, and then joined Blodwyn Pig, or Blodwyn as they were called, which was the best bunch of guys that I've ever been in a band with. Just wonderful guys. Musically, I was, you know, I was like the fly in the ointment, and very. I was trying to put arrangements into what were basically simple blues songs, and I was trying to stick things in that really didn't fit. But Blodwyn were good, and I ended up with them for about 6 months. And we did a terrific session for the BBC, which has never been released, and it was really good. And they were such fun, you know. I really loved that. Basically, I was replacing Mick Abrams, who then went on to form his own band. And yeah, great fun time. Good.
So how did you get involved with Flash?
This was shortly after Blodwyn Pig, and I guess I spent about a year not doing much. I've been in that band, Blodwyn. Really didn't know what to do. Had no idea how I could put a band together. Never considered it. Always wanted to be more of a sideman, more of a journeyman guitar player. And I had a few offers to put a band together, and I just really wasn't interested. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was still kind of a little shell-shocked about my departure from Yes. I took it very badly, and probably worse than I should. And I just kind of lost interest and spent a really blank year, drinking too much, taking too many drugs, having too much fun, still living in the little flat in Fulham. And then Chris Walsh from the Melody Maker did a whole page article about me, basically saying, why isn't this man working, this much underappreciated guitar player? Which was very sweet of him. I didn't know he was going to do that. And there were some miserable pictures taken of me standing on Glastonbury tour, looking kind of lost, kind of sad. And out of that article, I got this guy, Colin Carter, who then became Flash's singer. Chris Walsh he called up the Melody Maker and given Colin my phone number, which was kind of a naughty thing to do. And this guy, Colin, said, "I'm a singer, you should put a band together." I said, no, I'm not interested. And he says, "I've got your address, I'm coming over." And he was there within half an hour, knocking on the door. And we got on so well. And simply what happened was he had a reel-to-reel tape machine, and we wrote one song together. And then started looking around for drummers and bass players. And it all happened very smoothly. And we got a terrific recording deal. With enough money that we could rehearse for about 3 months and put everybody on some kind of retainer. And we kicked off, I think sometimes we rehearsed 7 days a week. And it just got very good, very good. Once we'd found the right bass player and the right drummer. And we were going to have a keyboard player. I wanted Tony Cage to join. He wasn't too interested. And we auditioned a lot of keyboard players. Ian MacDonald from Crimson. And we couldn't find the right persons. So I just said, well, let's do it as a three-piece with a lead singer. And really, that was interesting. So I had my hands literally full of having to play rhythm and lead and just everything that I could wring out of a guitar. And it was fantastic for me, and I never regarded it as my band, but it was certainly, it meant a lot to me. It was almost to the point of obsession, and the music was great.
So on your first album, Tony Kaye did actually guest on that. Did he actually ever do any gigs with you as well at that point? So it was just
I was still trying to get him to join. Because we did the album before we'd done a gig.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But he wasn't interested. And I just thought, okay, we'd do without.
It's pretty complex music to play as a three-piece.
We were very well trained, yeah.
Pretty demanding on stage.
Yeah.
And you made an impact in America quite quickly.
We were very lucky. Within 6 months... somebody had edited down a thing called Small Beginnings, which was quite lengthy, as all the Flash pieces were. And this DJ, I think in Philadelphia, oh God, I can't remember his name, that's bad, had edited it down to like 3.5 minutes and was playing it on the radio. And it became a minor hit. It got into the top 30, and all of a sudden it was like, well, guys, you're going to go to the States, and they released the album, and the first album, that did pretty well. And we were over there within 6 months, which was a thrill for me. I'd never been to America, and I was still in my kind of denial about Yes, and I wouldn't listen to them or talk about them. But I was itching to get to America because they were touring America, and that was personally I was very happy to see Flash out there working, and we worked hard. The first tour was weeks and weeks and weeks, and kept getting extended, 7 or 8 weeks I think it was, and we played the smallest places and the biggest places. We played to 30,000 people, supporting Alice Cooper, and then the next night we'd be playing to 50 people in Oshkosh or Scottsbluff, Nebraska. It was very good training. We just worked and worked and worked. And it nearly cost me my sanity. We got to the point where we were working too hard. We'd never been on the road before, not in America. But we were quite well handled. But of course the management were just signing contracts. Oh, you're going to play here, you're going to play there, and we were doing incredibly long journeys. Sometimes 1,000 miles a day with like 3 or 4 flights. So you go 100 miles and then change planes, and it was quite exhausting. So, but the only thing to look for, I know everybody says this, but the only thing to look forward to was the actual gig. But it was good training, and we had a lot of stamina and drank a lot of alcohol, and mostly played remarkably well. I've still got some live tapes of those days, and when we were hot, we were hot. The songs got faster and faster and faster, but there was nothing else like us. You know, there really wasn't. And you know, once again, like yes, it was Flash were unique. You know,
Because as you were saying to me earlier, in that short period of 2.5 years, you did 3 albums
Yeah.
and successive touring.
yeah,
And when you look at that sort of in these times, you know, it seems a remarkably intense.
yeah. 4 albums, including my first solo one.
I was going to go on to
Oh,
that
okay.
in a minute, actually. I mean, in fact, your solo album is a very interesting one because you collaborated on certain things with Jan Ackerman, and also you had Phil Collins on playing guitar, and Steve Hackett also guested. How did that album actually come about? Because it's a very interesting collection of music.
Well, the album is still half finished. That's not why it's called Two Sides either, but I'd seen Focus play. We supported Focus in Holland, and I was just knocked out with Jan's playing. And this was before Focus had hit over here or in the States. They were only known in Germany and Holland, I think. And Jan and I got together, and I guess he saw me play in Flash a few times, and I went to as many Focus gigs that I could. And we just sat down one day, and I said, well, why don't we go into a studio? And we were just playing guitar. And Jan was he had a similar style to me, but he was so much more proficient than I was. He was a much cleaner player and more aggressive, and he had a kind of attack, rather like Django Reinhardt. Jan was almost the perfectly formed musician. I mean, his classical playing was tremendous. His improvising was then, I thought, second to none. So I thought it'd be nice to go into the studio and just with 2 electric guitars, and that's what we did. And we, I think after either a Flash gig or a Focus gig, we went to Advision Studios and got there about 1 a.m. and just played till about 8 a.m. You know, Marshall amp here, Marshall amp there, and we just sat facing each other and played at each other with no idea of what we just improvised, no discussion. And out of that, I mean, the poor engineer had to change the tape every 20 minutes or every 23 minutes, and the tape op, actually fell asleep. You know, I mean, that's how boring. You know, it's Guitar World. You know, and it must have been so boring for anybody listening. But out of that, those ideas, really rough and chaotic, but very challenging. And out of that, I thought, well, let's do an album. But what went wrong with that was when Flash were doing the 3rd album, Capitol Records in their infinite wisdom said, why don't we have the 3rd Flash album and your solo album come out on the same day? And I hadn't finished mine. And so what happened was, in the making of the 3rd Flash album, I would spend daytimes working with Flash and then night times doing my Banks album and going to another studio. And this went on for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. My stomach's rumbling. A lot of... so I was just running myself ragged. And really, the 3rd Flash album, I like my playing on it, but there's some pieces that I don't participate as much as I wished I had, because I wasn't there. I was in Wembley recording my solo thing. So the solo album is kind of 2/3 finished. The side 2 is basically just jamming with Ray Bennett, Flash's bass player, and Phil on drums. And Jan still hates that. Whenever I see him, he still says, why did you release that? It's horrible. But side 1 is fully formed, and I like a lot.
So that must have been quite an incredible pace to think about 2 creative projects like that at the same time.
But, you know, it's good to work under pressure. And I think also at that time we went to Australia for 1 show in Melbourne. 1 show. So we flew there, we had a day there, and I think we flew back the next day. in the middle, I think, in the middle of recording the album.
It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
So would you say in the end that sort of because of the workload, did that contribute to Flash sort of burning out when it did?
We'd done 4 American tours, and we died out of lack of interest. Really, we desperately needed a proper manager, which we didn't have. We did a disastrous 4th tour. I think the agency went bankrupt and disappeared with a lot of cash. We were showing up for gigs that didn't exist. We found out a couple of times that we were supposed to be playing in 2 places on the same night, hundreds of miles apart. It got crazy. There's a lot of friction in the band. I was travelling. I just went a little. I was having my first nervous breakdown, but didn't realise it. The band was still playing okay, but we had these long. We'd have a week off, and you can't do that when you're on tour. It gets expensive, because you're spending a week in a hotel and you're just sitting around like this and spending the bar tab and the food tab and. I'm slowly coming around to the reason why we broke up, but what happened was because of the last 3 gigs that we did before we broke up, I got very angry because we were playing to an audience. We were supporting Three Dog Night, who were even then a pretty successful pop band. And it wasn't our kind of audience, and we would come on before they came on. And the first 10, 12 rows were mums and dads with their fingers in their ears and kids, and they just hated Flash, and it demoralised the band. And the last 3 gigs, and I'd be like doing this and throwing the guitar up in the air. I mean, I was always very visual, and I would turn around and a couple of times I saw the singer with his back to the audience and the bass player. And I was furious, because you just don't do that, no matter how the audience is. And I was spending a lot of time in LA between the gigs, and I'd fallen in love, and I was going to get married, and I was taking my obnoxious girlfriend around on kind of like a John and Yoko thing, and staying in different hotels. Sometimes they'd never see me until 10 minutes before the show, and then I'd magically appear. Where is he? And I don't know. And I was just not in a good space. Certainly drinking too much, and I was addicted to Valiums, and not in a good place. Remarkably, I was still playing very well, but I just went a little nuts, and it became a Spinal Tap scenario, and we broke up in the Hilton Hotel in Albuquerque. I said I was going to leave, and then later at 4 a.m. I called up the rest of the guys and said, no, I didn't mean it. We only had 4 more gigs to do, I think. Let's finish the tour. Let's go back to England, and let's get a proper manager. Let's get this sorted out. And then the next morning or afternoon, very hungover, I was sitting in the coffee shop in the hotel, and I could see the lobby, and there were all the guys getting in the car, and I went, where are you going? And they said, we're going back to England. So they left me in Albuquerque. And I went, well, what do you mean you're going back? We've got 4 more gigs to do. And they just went, and they went back to LA and then back to England. And so it was all a shambles. And then when I got back to London, this was after our manager asking me to sign away a piece of my publishing so he would get me a plane ticket. And I just went, no. And I spent a couple of weeks in LA trying to figure out how to get home. And went back and had a meeting with the band, and they just said, well, we don't want to play with you, we can do better without you. And then the band broke up, sadly. I think if we'd stayed together, we either would have made it very well or just split asunder. But I think if we just stuck it out, we were only going for just over 2 years. If we'd stuck it out for another 2 years, I think we'd been pretty successful. But a great shame.
So after that, you had a band called Empire for a bit, and you moved to America.
Yeah. Well, Empire was going to be Flash, and we had the Flash's bass player. And that went wrong, because he and I are not the same kind of people. And one day I caught him in bed with my wife. So, you can see that wasn't going to happen. Yeah, and in 76 I moved to the States. Throughout all kinds of chaos, I had all my furniture stolen, I had my guitar stolen, my clothes were cut up, not by Flash, but by one person in Flash. And eventually I was living in a flat in Victoria in kind of abject poverty, and I just thought, I'm going to go to America. So I went to Los Angeles with one guitar and a suitcase and 2 phone numbers, and ended up living there for many years. Kind of a brave thing to do. Not live there, but I mean just go there with virtually no contacts. And 6 months later, after sleeping on many floors and many sofas and a couple of garages of these people that became dear friends, I was homeless and just sleeping somewhere different every night. And my office was a phone box outside the Tropicana Motel, where Tom Waits was living at the time. And I'd hang out by this call box, just waiting for record companies to call me back and that kind of thing. So yeah, didn't have a phone. And then 6 months later, I got a deal for Empire. If I can backtrack a little, we had done an Empire album in London in 74, I think, about a year after Flash, which never got released. And that had Phil Collins on drums. And a terrific band, actually. All the guys are very good. A great disappointment. And we had my girlfriend, and then became my wife, was the singer of Empire. And we worked long and hard on doing that album, and it never got released. So I was very disappointed is putting it mildly, but I was very I got very cynical about that, and so when I went to the States, got the new deal for Flash, and then called up the bass player, the new deal for Empire, and then the singer in the band, my wife, didn't want to do the band. She'd gone back to New York to live with this is very incestuous. She went back to New York to live with Flash's bass player. And I got the deal for the band, and then she said, I'm not coming back unless Ray can be the bass player. What do you mean? We've got a record deal. We start rehearsing next week. No, Ray's got to be in the band. So anyway, I paid for them to fly out from New York to LA. Put them both up in a motel in their nuptial bliss, and on the day of the first rehearsals, went to pick them up. We had rehearsals booked for like 2 or 3 months. Went to pick them up, found my wife distraught, saying, "He's gone." I went, "What do you mean he's gone?" Ray, the bass player, had gone out and done a runner. He'd gone out to get some cigarettes and then taken a cab to the airport and gone back to his wife in New York. So we had no bass player. So we had the singer back and no bass player. And I didn't tell the management company. I couldn't, because, it's just, we had these rehearsals booked. So we auditioned about 50 bass players and then finally came up with the right guy. But and I was thinking that this is once again, this was before Spinal Tap was made, but all these chaotic things were just going on, and it became a real kind of soap opera thing, you know. And I was just thinking, you know, all I wanted to do was play guitar.
Did that, in the end, sort of motivate you then to sort of going back into session work eventually, just concentrating on...
Eventually, 8 years, I think, of Empire, doing 3 albums, it just killed it. And we never did a gig because the singer was insecure about being on stage, and she was going to dance classes and not showing up for rehearsals because she wanted to get her body fit for the big performance. And I just got very tired of all that. And we did some showcases where we had people from record companies come down to this huge soundstage that we were rehearsing on. We had just about every record company in town would come down, and often the singer wasn't there. And we were doing long pieces of music and so good music. And it just got to a point where we didn't do any gigs, and the last day of rehearsals, when we got this manager who'd never managed a band before, and he put a lot of his own money into paying everybody and paying for the rehearsals, and he just went into it without really realising what a soap opera he got himself into. And on the last day, we were going to have a bit of a party, and had a catering company in, and some people had been invited down, and I had a few words with you notice I don't mention her name, with the singer, and she wasn't happy about something. And this was in the middle of this set what we were doing, the showcase set. And I said, don't talk about this now. This is not the time to do it. Let's just finish playing. And something was said, and I can't remember what. But at the end of the whole set, I really lost my temper. Something doesn't often happen, and I pushed over all the tables and all the food. It just went completely berserk. There was food everywhere, and the band were just looking, and they were still on the stage. And what's happened? And I just said, right, you guys, you stay on there. Let's play now. And we did this wonderful about 2 hours of of chaotic music, and it was great. Unfortunately, the tape had run out, and it was never recorded. So that was the end of Empire. Sad, a waste of 8 years, really. And I was starting to do sessions, and enjoying that more and more and more. Played on some Shaka Khan things. We had the same management. Yeah, often I was the only white boy in the session. That was great.
Lionel Richie as well, didn't you?
Yeah. Although that was just, can you put a solo on? And I think I had to redo somebody else's solo. Not very creative for any of that stuff. You're just sitting there with an engineer, and you know, it's like, okay, 3 hours, now you're out of here, that kind of thing. But some sessions were fun, and some weren't. But I was never a typical session player, because I really ended up sounding like me, which is not always what a producer will want. But I stuck a toe in the water, and I did get to play with Lonnie Donegan, which was great. You know, my boyhood hero. You know, when I was 8 years old, I wanted to be Lonnie Donegan, or just walk in the same room as him, and Lonnie would go, "Hi," you know. And then years later, I ended up doing this session with him, with Ringo on drums, and Adam Faith produced it, and it was fun. And Lonnie Donegan was playing in Lake Tahoe, and he said, I really like your playing. Would you like to join my band? And I just dismissed it, and I said, no thanks. And it wasn't until years later I thought, Lonnie Donegan asked me to join his band, and I just went, no thanks. You know, how weird is that?
Well, bringing you up to date with your activity now, you mentioned your current improvisation band.
Harmony in Diversity. Yeah, that's a kind of movable feast of musicians. The whole premise behind that, and it's usually a 3-piece, so it's guitar, bass and drums, but electronic drums, so you can get them. And I use a lot of guitar synthesizer because I prefer guitar when it doesn't sound like guitar. But that's completely improvised with no agenda. The only agenda is we don't have an agenda and we don't discuss anything at all, not what key, what tempo or anything. And sometimes it's very boring and sometimes it's absolutely fantastic, or a mixture of the two in one set. Some of the audiences have been very attentive and almost saintly in their patience while we go through all these strange musical moods. I like it a lot. It's a lot of fun, and it's not jazz. There are quite a few improv jazz situations, but nobody's ever done it in more of a rock context. And the other rule is no 12 bars. You know, I mean, and that's about it really. And I like it, and it's harmony and diversity because you know all the diverse elements of music sometimes can be in perfect harmony, and that's the way it works. I'm trying to put my own band together called Self-Contained, which will be an instrumental band. So it'd be guitar, bass, drums, and keyboards. I'd love to go out and do instrumentals, you know, in a similar vein to Focus, I guess. Very hard to do to get interest in that because once again, if it's jazz, you can do that. Nobody will question it. But if it's not jazz, and I hate to use the term rock, but if it's something that is a little more solid, rock instrumentals, I suppose. A lot of promoters are a little scared of that. So I'm still trying to put Self-Contained together. I've got some great musicians who would love to do it. But it's a question of you know, putting the everyday thing together and the finance and all those boring things that one must do. But I've got great hopes for that. It'll be good.
You still have your enthusiasm for playing after all these years.
Yeah. I went for a period of 2 years with not picking up a guitar at all. And actually, when I came back to the guitar, I literally didn't touch one. They were just sitting there on their stands, getting dustier and dustier. And when I came back to it, I was quite surprised that it was, you know, like getting on a bike and not falling off. I mean, it was... I hadn't lost, you know, the dexterity or the technique. And now it's an excuse for not rehearsing. But no, I'm kind of lucky, really. I'm still obsessed with music. Sometimes I prefer listening to playing, but it's a big thing, you know. It's what I do. It's the only thing I do well. So you know, if you can do one thing well in life, I think that's pretty good.
Peter Banks, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much. Be lucky.